everyone, and welcome back to another webinar with us over here at VanillaSoft. Today, you are joining us for DxO It Yourself, Piloting Digital Experience Officer Programs. I'm so happy to have all of you here and really excited to get into things. We've got an absolutely stacked agenda for everyone. Real talk, I would not be surprised if we run out of time and we need to pick this great conversation up later. So I want to get into things just as soon as we can. If you've joined us before, welcome back. If this is your first time with us, so glad to have you here. If you're new, just a couple of quick housekeeping items we run through every time. Again, if you've been here before, these haven't changed. They shouldn't be a surprise. So as a reminder, all of our attendees are in listen-only mode today, so please feel free to be active in the chat. To that point, this webinar also has been pre-recorded, so that's why we're able to be active in the chat with you all. We did record this a couple of weeks ago, so your participation here just represents that you acknowledge that this is pre-recorded, but also could be recorded again for future on-demand playback. So that is that, and we are going to move right along ahead to our presenters today and talk about our guests. So again, if you've been here before, probably recognize me at this point. My name's Etzkorn. I'm a fundraising evangelist here at VanillaSoft and got a big background in higher ed advancement. Lots going on in the fundraising world over here, and I'm really happy to be here with everyone today. Fortunately, though, no one needs to hear from me anymore. Today is all about Perry Radford and Rad Philanthropy. She's got so much great stuff to share with everyone, so I will turn it over to her for her introduction. Welcome, Perry.
Hey, Emily. Hi, everybody. I'm Perry Radford, founder and principal at Rad Philanthropy. These days, I work with both nonprofits and donors to help them cultivate generosity. So what does that mean? It means I work with donors to help them identify their values around giving and develop personal giving plans. And with organizations, I help by offering interim staffing during vacancies and leaves. I help them increase capacity by implementing special projects. And by partnering around strategic plans and program development. Before going out on my own with Rad Philanthropy, I've worked in the higher ed fundraising space for over 15 years with schools like Scripps College, Emerson College, Caltech, Harvey Mudd, and UC Santa Cruz, my own alma mater. So I'm so excited for our conversation here today and that all of you are here for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Moving on, you guys should be able to see just a quick agenda on your screens. This is a very high level of what we're going to be covering today. So as you've gathered from our title, we're going to be talking all about DxO programs. We're going to be talking about what they are, why they matter, going through what's needed to get one going. We're also going to be touching on creating a successful pilot and also looking at how we're evaluating that and looking at the success of the program itself. So we're going to jump right into things. As you can see, we're going to start here at, what they are and why they matter. But before we actually go any further, Perry, I've actually got a question for you. So I know we'll talk on this later in our time together today, just looking at the creation of a pilot itself. But something that I think would be great to start with and get your take on is why we're actually talking about a pilot. So what are we doing considering a pilot as opposed to just jumping all in and saying, this is what we're doing now? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, you and I have been working in the annual giving field for a while, and I think we can think back to some of the big lifts and implementations we did starting new programs. I remember the first time I brought texting to a university I worked at and things like that. And when you're doing that for the first time, it's a pretty big lift. I think the fundamental question is, can you really predict at the beginning what you need when you're starting that program from scratch? So whether it's a DxO program or anything else, starting crowdfunding, starting days of giving, new communication channels, I think there's a lot of upside to starting with a pilot, with a plan or a idea that you'll have a long-term implementation. So some of those reasons why you want to start with a pilot first is, that idea of we don't know what we don't know. Let's figure this out. Let's have some clear questions for ourselves. And by having clear questions, that also means we're going to have specific answers we're looking for that will inform us. So creating data, creating information that will help guide us to do this in the way that is right for our program and right for our institution. There's other things to think about too that I think matter when you're looking at doing a pilot or a new program, which is implementation. Implementation of any new software is a really big lift. Part of what I like about an idea like this is if you're already using VanillaSoft for your engagement center, you've already crossed that threshold with a lot of this. You already have a working partnership with advancement services, business practices around how you use this product. So you've taken care of a lot of that already. But when you're working with different team members, when you're trying something new, you need to get buy-in. So having that pilot both with your colleagues and your leaders, this is going to make things way easier for you to really test the waters and have everybody on board for that idea of, we're going to project some things. We'll see if that happens or not. We're in it together. Let's just try. Create yourself a soft landing for it.
I like that a lot. It's like a soft landing and also almost a soft launch too. There's something about, I think, the mindset and just framing around a pilot itself, rather than just walking in and saying, this is our program now, and we're going, 400% steam ahead, all in. There's a bit of we're creating a new program that's going to be designed to grow based on the lessons learned, this first go round. And I think it also opens the door for everybody to acknowledge that some of it's going to work really well and some of it isn't going to work well. And that, like you said, will help you inform where you go next and what you do next. And again, I don't know, for a better lack of phrasing, it feels safer almost like you're setting yourself up for the long run and acknowledging that it is going to be a work in progress. And I think that that's such a great mindset to have.
Yeah. And one more thing to add is it's a question of resources. We have limited resources in staff time and budget. So when we're trying to be as strategic as we can, but we also know we can't predict the future, we can't control everything, a pilot is going to give us better information and a closer ability to predict or be a little bit more careful instead of putting, going all in, as it were, on having it totally ready to go out of the box day one.
Totally. And out of the box is when you're creating something like this isn't what you want. And we'll talk so much more later about just customization and personalization. And I think that's, everything that we want to be doing with these types of programs. So thank you for setting the scene like that. And again, we'll touch more on, evaluating the success of that pilot later on today. But now we'll walk it back to the start of our agenda here. And let's kind of go back high level. DXO programs. I'm sure it's something that everyone here in our audience today has heard of and talked about and met on. And I think a lot of times working in this space, there's a lot of discussion around what these things are. And I think it's harder sometimes to nail down a conversation with somebody providing some more context and definition and kind of the what and the why to them. So back over to you to kind of talk high level and what these are and why they matter, why they're important.
Yeah, so we see DXO getting thrown around. That might be short for digital experience officer. Some people are calling these digital engagement officers. What these sorts of roles have in common is it's taking the full suite of what we do in annual giving, and it's positioning an officer, one person, to really scale that up to individual prospects. So instead of mass texting prospects, you're going to have one team member individually texting your base, really trying to forge those personal connections to better understand your constituents and where your goals align with them and how you can create partnerships together. That's really the crux of it. That being said, there's a little bit more to it, which is this idea of taking some of the best practices from the sales world, sales and marketing. So using this concept of lead generation as opposed to maybe moves management is a different way to think about it. Using cadences, using digital enablement. How do we take those tools to really enrich what we're doing and expand our reach? In annual giving, we've gotten pretty good at mass outreach over the last decade, but I think now we're starting to see the downside of that. We're losing people's attention span. We're losing that personal touch, and there's only so much you can do with segmentation and personas and those sorts of things to really, show that you know somebody, to have them get to know you and your institution better. And a program like this can really help with that.
So many good things. The problem with recording these webinars is that you say so many good things when you're talking about them preparing, and then you say them again when you're recording. And all I want to do is write down everything and go back point by point. So I love everything that you're saying. And I think a really awesome point is, we have been doing a lot of this in annual giving for a while, and we continue to have these conversations around, people aren't picking up anymore, or it's harder to keep people's attention for longer. And I think that's what you just nailed on, that everyone's looking for a solution, and there's not going to be a one size fits all solution, but this is the direction that we all need to be going, so that we can dig deeper into our pools of constituents, so that we can actually, I think, employ more of what we're talking about doing. I think we talk a lot about, we're going to pay more attention to the specifics that people want, whether it's time of year that they want to be communicated with or channel that they want. But this is so much more than saying, well, we're texting now in addition to making phone calls. Therefore, we are now doing this multi-channel engagement. It has to go so much deeper. It has to be more strategic and more thought out. And I think that that's just a really important kind of starting point for that. In terms of looking at, and I want to talk more about cadences too. So too many good things to go back to, because cadences, I think, have been coming up more and more lately, and they're such a great thing to be able to talk about, and so many more opportunities for personalization, and even just being nimble to test things out and evaluate the success. But in terms of looking at how they're structured and how they're set up, is it going to be more of a blueprint that you follow every time? Is this a one size fits all thing, or can this really be however you want it to be? I think there's a lot of confusion sometimes around getting it off the ground when you start to imagine this.
Yeah, I think like a lot of things, we know that annual giving can be the R&D department of an advancement shop. So when you have a tool like this, the inclination is to use it for fundraising and direct solicitation for annual gifts, right? That's not the only way you can use a tool for this. And I think that's really important. You and I have talked about this before. I'm increasingly convinced and interested in taking engagement centers out of annual giving and really making them a lot more flat to support all the frontline needs of an organization. But it's up to you to be really clear on what that is. And I think some of this goes to, what are your goals you already have as an organization? So do you care about first-time visits? Do you care about mid-level giving? Are you just trying to get more fundraising activity? Are you looking for volunteers, internship providers, mentors? What are your goals? Those are the sorts of ways that you can apply something like this. But it's really up to you to choose the right application for your team.
Yeah, awesome. We have talked about that before. And the first time, I think that you had mentioned that to me, the first time that we talked, does this need to live in annual giving? Should this even be living in annual giving? I continue to go back there, and I think there's going to be a continued conversation there. And I'm excited to see what that looks like. And I'm excited to see what directions people go with their programs, just with exactly that. And I think that's going to go a long way in helping everyone imagine who these programs are going to be right for. It's very hard sometimes to conceptualize something from the ground up. And so being able to take it out of some of these silos where you're working in annual giving or you're working in an engagement center and we're only working in this silo. So that means we aren't thinking about leadership level giving, or we aren't even thinking about just some other stewardship opportunities. Talking about these DXO programs is really folding all of that activity and that outreach and that work into the mix. And I think that's going to open up more doors and more avenues to be more successful in this type of outreach and this type of communication with constituents. I'm really excited to see it unfold.
It's fundamentally a donor-centric paradigm. Are we reaching out to meet the goals of one unit in advancement with our prospects, or are we using our best outreach tools that we have as a division to find the right opportunities for our prospect to engage with us along the lines of the acts of giving that are most important to them? And I think of the acts of giving as the 5 T's. We all know time, talent, treasure, testimony, and ties are just as important. So when we think about it that way, I think there's a big shift that we can potentially make. And that unlocks so much more value for our organizations in a holistic sense.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree so much that we could spend the rest of the webinar on this slide, only talking about this. I am going to move on to our next slide so we can talk about getting into testing some things out, looking at maybe some more of the nitty gritty, some more of the planning. A lot of times what also happens, I think, is that we get stuck on that first slide in our conversations with our organizations. We talk about the DXO programs, maybe we attend a webinar, and then the conversations never go any further. And this is that step that you need to take it a little bit further and cross that hurdle, actually work on putting something together. So looking at what we actually need to test something like this out, where would you want to begin? Do you want to start with a strategy and a test? Do you want to start with software? Do we need to start with staffing? Which of those should we go to first? And what are all those things going to look like for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all, you need a multiple pronged approach for this, but all of these things really matter. So you do need software. You need something to help you do this outreach to track your progress. Like I said earlier, if you're already using VanillaSoft as an engagement to manage your engagement center, you're using something similar, why not see if there's a way that you can shift the use of that to fit a program like this? You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let's be maximizers. Let's really utilize what we already have at hand. And that could be other suites of tools you have as well. Be creative in thinking about how you are using those platforms. The next thing I think that you need is this kind of idea of strategy or your hypothesis or test. So what are your goals for your department or unit? What's a campaign that you think could really aid that goal, right? What's going to get you closer to that? And how can we create a cadence or a set of outreaches that we think will help us achieve that goal? So be really specific, be really granular with that, because then you will be able to, at the end of it, evaluate, were we able to achieve that or not? And when you think about that, you'll be able to say, yeah, we didn't get the results we wanted because we didn't set this up. The cadence wasn't the right type, or we realized this call to action, just our audience isn't ready for it now, or, there's lots of things that you can figure out from that. So I think it's important that you're specific from the beginning. Going back to that idea of the pilot, you're going to be able to test. We talked about this a lot at the beginning. And the last thing is staff. So who's actually going to do this? And again, going to this idea of be creative, do what suits your organization. I think there's a few ways you can approach this. So you could have a full-time, if you have an annual giving officer in your department, this is something they can lead as a pilot officer. If you maybe have somebody with a limited portfolio, like for example, someone on your team who just does reunions or works with gold alums or something like that, they might be a really good fit for this. If you have somebody who you want to grow their frontline skills, they've been doing a great job with other parts of fundraising, this could be great for them. Then you might also have students you could turn to for this. So if it's a pilot, do you have a really experienced engagement center ambassador who could do this? If it's going to be for a few months only, is there a student you could bring on as an intern? There's lots of different ways you could do this. And it's, I would encourage people to think about this also through the lens of succession planning and using this pilot to really cultivate the fundraising talent you have in your office.
I couldn't agree more with literally everything you just said, and I can't figure out which place I want to start. So I'm going to go right into the middle and take it from the software itself and go in a couple of different directions. Everything that you're talking about in terms of leveraging your employees, whether they're student or staff, and talking about what you're doing, maybe with the software that you already have. Like you said earlier, if you're already using VanillaSoft, for example, well, you've already got so much customization at your fingertips already. You've already done the heavy lift of implementation. Go ahead and run with it and see what else you can test out. terms of thinking of your strategy, you have to consider everything. Like you just said, what are you actually trying to accomplish? Not only what are your goals, personally for your department or your team, but what are the priorities as well for the university advancement team, or how you can help those goals of yours factor into major gift officer goals, for example, whatever the case may be. And I think something that's so important to remember is that you don't have to do it all at once. You can pick and choose which pieces of these to use in your pilot. The other thing is you're not going to be able to successfully evaluate a pilot if you are going, again, full steam ahead. That's the whole point of this pilot, like we talked about earlier. You can't do a science experiment and not have a control group. And how are you supposed to figure out which part has the effect on the other part of the experiment if you're not comparing it to anything? Science wasn't my thing. So anybody, the comments, whatever, make fun of me, it's all good. But you know what I'm trying to say. You do need to have something to compare it to, and it is okay to start small. So if you have an engagement center already and you're using VanillaSoft, great news. We can continue the work that you're already doing in VanillaSoft and just build it out a little bit more. It doesn't have to be a huge, crazy lift. It can be a small test, and then you can take what you learn and you can grow from there. Similarly with the staff that you've got, if you've got students and you don't yet have the budget or the time to hire a staff member, a full-time staff member to work on something, or maybe you need some results to justify adding that portion of your budget, work with what you've got. There's so much that you can do with what you already have. And if you have the software in place that's so flexible and customizable, the sky is almost really the limit. And I think there's also a kind of issue sometimes that it comes in annual giving or, in an engagement office program, something like that, where you want to add on something new, and budget is always a restrained resource. And it's hard to provide justification with hard numbers and experience if you can't test it out first, which came first, the chicken or the egg. So again, just going back to leveraging what you've already got so that you can set up some strategies to help inform what you want your next hypothesis to be. It's definitely going to be a work in progress. And I think that also kind of takes me back to why this idea of the pilot is so important, because a pilot program is supposed to be smaller. It's supposed to be a more constrained time. You're picking some hard parameters and you're saying, this is what we're looking to find out, and this is the time frame that we're doing it within. And I think it makes it a lot more manageable.
Totally.
I just went in like 6 different directions there. So I'm paused because I think I could keep going. I just threw a bunch at you. I'll go ahead and back off for a second.
No, I think we're honing in on some key points here, right? Which is like, be smart with this. You use the word leverage. I think that's such a key word here. This is all about leveraging what you have, using data to test the waters, to really set yourself up for success. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And it also doesn't have to be something that's cookie cutter. Use that experimental space to figure out what's right for you.
Yes. And yes, I love that. Something that has been continuing to come up. I've been going to some of these annual giving conferences. I've got more coming up, and something that now has come up a few times that I'm keeping my eye out for is opportunities to participate in conversations and talk with people more about what it is that they're doing. In most cases at this point with student employees, we all saw over the course of leading up to the pandemic and over the course of the pandemic with the more traditional call center model, dialing for dollars and things like that. And we all know the conversations around those. And people have gone from, get rid of the phone-a-thon, get rid of your call center, and then there's this gap that's filled. And I've talked with some people now that are saying, we took it away and, the ROI wasn't there, but you don't have somebody that can pick up that kind of work where that hole was left. And so now the conversations are turning back to what do we do instead? And thus has entered the concept of DXO, and we're continuing to see that take foot. But a lot of conversations I've had have been with people that are saying, we've still got some students. We had a great core group of students. We didn't want to get rid of them. So we're having them do a couple different things. We've got some systems and they're doing some texting and they're doing some emails or they're doing some video, and maybe they throw in a couple phone calls, but it's not an engagement center, which Cool, fine. One of the great things about all of this is that you can call it whatever you want. You can call them interns or ambassadors, and you can have them doing some different activities, but they're still doing that work. It doesn't change that they're still doing this kind of work. You can take what you've got, whatever restraints you've got, whatever parameters you have to work within, and you can be more strategic with it. If you're already paying for some software, if you're not using something that you can do it all under one umbrella, let's check that out. And again, take that budget and apply it to something else, keep those good students, and put a test together and put something more formal together to follow the work that you've already been doing. And that's a really cool conversation that I'm excited to have more with people moving forward, because I think we're moving away from that silo again of call centers and call centers bad. What do we do instead? There's just so many more avenues that can open up if we're seeing that all we're doing is bringing everything under one umbrella, if that makes any sense to you.
Totally. I mean, one of all the many things that have changed in the last few years, one thing that hasn't changed, donors still love students. Donors will always love students. Alumni will always love students. We just need to think about different ways of fostering that connection. And this may be one of those ways to do it.
Totally. And then folding in some professional staff as well to do some more of that higher level work and those higher level phone calls.
Yeah, so it's about it's what you said. Let's be more strategic than dialing for dollars. Let's take it to the next level and do some more targeted asks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and move on so we've already been kind of blending our topics so far and talking about the creation of a pilot, but I think there's a lot to hit on here. So with our remaining time, let's move back into the discussion around the pilot and let's talk about creating it before we get into evaluating its success. So you touched earlier on talking about getting some buy-in from leadership and maybe some other units on campus, really just kind of embracing that idea of collaboration and across different teams, everyone working together. Where do you land on that? How do you see this being a part of a conversation with all these other units? And I have a lot of feelings on buy-in from leadership, but where do you see maybe some of those hurdles and why this is so important to cross?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of teams are potentially going to be working together on this. So that's why you need leadership buy-in, and it needs to be clear that, there's an expectation that we're going to be collaborating on this, we're testing it out. That needs to come from the top. The other thing is kind of going to that idea of we want to showcase our students or we want to have more personal connections. That isn't just valuable to annual giving. So by having leadership, having a seat at the table at this or being an important part of this conversation, they may see as much or more strategic value in leveraging that personal connection for other means. So we really need to have them involved in this in a meaningful way.
I would agree. A lot of things come to mind when it comes to buy-in from leadership. First place I'll start is just the idea of if they're not already bought in, it is a bit of a hurdle to cross, right? So you could be working on a team where the buy-in is there, or maybe this is coming from the top down. And if that's the case, then, fantastic. Pitching your new software or coming to them and saying, we want to add more seats to our VanillaSoft licenses, it's going to be that much easier for you. But a lot of times, going back to the idea of annual giving maybe being siloed from major gifts and being siloed from the rest of advancement, there's often, at least from my experience, some education that needs to happen. I hate using that phrase as a concept, but it does have to happen. There's been a lot of times where, you are going to have to go and say, this is what we need to do, and this is why. And then really laying out not only what your goals are, but predicting out what your ROI could be or what results you're going to achieve. And that's really challenging to do. For one, if you haven't done it yet, you have nothing to lean on. But for another, you're really putting yourself out there. It was also why, again, going back to the pilot, maybe even a little bit safer to do, but it can be very challenging to do that and put that out there. And you have to be strategic with that in and of itself to get that buy-in. But
one thing I want to add is that, when I think of the idea of managing up, one of the core concepts of it for me is making the work easier for leadership because they have so much on their plates.
Yes.
And if you're a unit leader and you really want to start a DXO program, it seems very hard to do. You need to get budget for new FTEs. You need to get approval. You need to work with HR. You need, the budget side of it, working with the cabinet. There's so many pieces to make that happen, to really formally go all the way on this program. That's a big ask. So by doing a pilot or presenting the idea of a pilot, that's really going to actually help your leadership team using the resources you already have, demonstrating if there's going to be long-term value in this, so that if your team does the pilot and you see, wow, this is really going to help us continue to increase the amount of unrestricted gifts we get, or build the middle of our pipeline, or whatever kind of more long-term goal is really driving your financial engine, that is really positioning them in the negotiations and the collaboration they have with other units and partners to bring more resources to the team to make it a fully fledged program.
Totally. And I'm going to sing VanillaSoft's praises in a bit here when we get to the evaluation, looking at how to determine, what your pain points were, where your successes were. But the more customizable your tech is, the more personalized that you can make the work that you're doing, the easier time you're going to have to show your results. Because like you just said, if you know that XYZ are the big goals that everyone is supposed to be pointing back to, you can use a customizable piece of technology to set yourself up to work in that direction. And that is going to then inform your results so that you can continue to get that buy-in. We've got a couple of customers that are using VanillaSoft for a variety of different activities, obviously, but for some more of this really strategic multi-channel engagement. And the ones that are not only doing it really well and really seeing some successes, not only do they have a great staff, you have to have great staff and you have to have those needles in a haystack to have the vision and see it through, but they're also the ones that have leadership on their side. And there's a few different, scenarios. Some of these are programs where leadership came to them and said, this is what we're doing and we're going all in, and everybody at the university is on board and it's a priority. And other times it's been, this is what we want to do. This is how we're going to make the impact. And they do the legwork to get that buy-in. All that to say is, I really, really think it is well worth the time to put that legwork in to get that buy-in. Otherwise, I think you're kind of always going to be up against that kind of rock, still trying to scramble your way back up, if you will, if you don't have that buy-in from leadership. So lots of different directions that could go, but a really important piece to getting that pilot off the ground.
And this is the time of year to have that conversation.
Yes.
Planning is hopefully about to start or starting for next fiscal year. So if you can sow the seeds that, what if we did a pilot next year so that we could do maybe a full-fledged program the fiscal year after that? That's a much more sustainable plan to start promoting with leadership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very timely. We didn't, full disclosure, everyone, we didn't necessarily plan our conversation to be around budget and planning season, but it's worked out very well. So very timely conversation indeed. Moving into implementation of the pilot here, we've talked some about software and we've talked some about strategy, but something that I think is an important point to highlight is that when you're putting together your program, you do need to be considering what you already know about your constituent base. A successful program is going to be one that you can personalize based on what you already know about your constituents. So you have to have again, a phrase that I don't love, I think it's overused, but boots on the ground. You know what's going on, you're in it, you're in the weeds, but there's a lot of great opportunities to call in reinforcements and look for somebody with the best practices to help guide you in those decisions. Again, because this can go in so many directions, not only can it get overwhelming, but, a consultant or another program might have some guidance for you. They're going to be able to say, these are the best practices, but they're also going to be able to sit down with you and say, tell me what you know about your constituents, and then let's work on forming that strategy from there. So I'm going to shoot that right on over to you to talk more about not only your thoughts on that, but this is also squaring your wheelhouse with what you're doing these days. So where do you land on all of that? And tell me all of those different ways that you can see this being, a great relationship.
Yeah. So the first partnership I think about that I think is going to yield some of the most fantastic results is partnering internally with your prospect research, prospect management, or analytics team members. I know that falls kind of different in different organizations. Those folks are going to have the data and are going to have the information to help you pick the right pilot focus. They will have seen trends within your audiences, and they might have some ideas off the top of the bat of really clear slices of people, not just a segment, a slice smaller than a segment, that would be really ripe for engaging using this sort of outreach. They're also going to be, I think, pretty important when it comes to not just that strategy, but those really in the weeds details us annual giving people like to get in when it comes to who is on the list. What is the actual criteria for the list? Should they be excluded from other sorts of outreach? Those sorts of questions. That partnership is really important. So I would suggest really doing what you can to bring those team members in, because I think they're going to have a ton of fun partnering with you on this, but it's going to set you up for success. The other kind of question, which you brought up, is what if you don't have those people who can help? What if you have a really small team? What if you've been understaffed? We all kind of have seen what's going on in higher ed right now with retention. It's really challenging. And I think there's an idea of capacity building. So people like me, and I know a number of other really fabulous practitioners in this space as well. We're here to help all these, especially smaller schools out there, take this sort of thing on, get used to it, and get up to speed enough that with all the policies and business practices set in place during the pilot, you can really just execute on your own in the future when you really make the program permanent. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for creating partnerships that will help you both in the short term of the pilot, but in the long term of establishing this as an important pillar of your annual giving or broader engagement or advancement shop.
I think there's, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not the consultant, you are, but I think there's so much value in having someone else's voice in the conversation so often, because not only can somebody from the outside just see things through a different lens, but we all know what it's like to be in the weeds. And it's the same way you're looking, at an Excel spreadsheet and you're reviewing a list of something and you look at it 800 times, quite literally, and then it looks perfect and you send it off for somebody else to review, and immediately, they see the one flaw that you were looking for. It's the same thing when you're setting, it's the same thing when you're doing anything, but when you're setting something up like this, there are so many aspects that you have to consider. Like we've already touched on, you have to consider your staff, and you've got to consider your constraints and which resources you already have and how to build off what you've got. And if you're sourcing something new, that's going to take time as well. It's so easy to get bogged down in those little details that bringing in another set of eyes that not only can do some of that double checking, but they can provide just a higher lens to say, this is the direction we should be going, or these are the pieces that I'm seeing as a concern. Let's go look over here and approach it that way. And this could just be me, but for me personally, if I was in that role, I would welcome that other voice in the mix to say, this is the slice that you're looking at. For me, I think when you get down to picking not only who you're going to be reaching out to, but what's going to be best for that group of people, by the time you've gotten to those decisions, really looking at your lists and whatnot, you've already made so many decisions. That's where I personally would fall apart. And I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Yeah, no, I mean, to use the cliche, sometimes you have to kill your darlings.
Yes.
And in annual giving, where we like to have about 100 different dashboards and important indicators,
right,
we get so bogged down. We know it all matters for short and long-term program development, that sometimes having another voice or another partner come in and say, no, we really just got to focus on retention, or no, we really just got to focus on mid-level. We know that's the case, but we know so many other things are important too that, we need some reinforcements.
Well, we don't want to leave anybody out, especially if you've been working in an engagement center space where we've just been historically dumping everybody in. Mm-hmm. You can't do that with something like this. You can't just dump everyone in and start segmenting. That's not the purpose. And that's like you were saying, it's so hard to do. It's so challenging to do. Anybody that in any type of annual giving mindset, I think, will especially struggle with that.
What very well put. We're includers.
100%. I don't want to lose time. I want to move on to some reporting and tracking. I've got a lot of excitement around this. I think this is also the part where sometimes things that tend to drop off. You can do the hard work and put everything together to create a pilot. But if you're not taking the time to evaluate it and doing so in a meaningful way, and then doing something with those results and what you've learned, ultimately you're not, taking anything to the next level, and you're not applying something and really making that impact. So I've got some thoughts on some great tools in VanillaSoft, but I want to hear from you first. If you're looking at evaluation of your pilot and looking for successes and looking for failures, where are you going to start? What are some important things for you to look at?
Yeah. So I think, when you come up with your hypothesis or your strategy for the pilot, you really have to decide what it is you are going to evaluate. And that should be something that you can measure. It should be quantitative. And not only should it be quantitative, your tools should be able to get that measurement for you. I can't tell you how many times I've sat around a table and we thought, if we just measured this, we'll know how well we're doing. And then it turns out we can't get that.
Right.
We cannot extract that. So this is kind of where the partnerships are important, again, with your reporting folks, your advancement services folks, but also your customer service, your staff, in a partnership like VanillaSoft, who can help you figure out what are the reports that are going to generate the right information for us. And I would encourage people to think about a kind of big picture results that you're looking for and tracking for. But I'd also encourage people to think about milestones. And over the course of your pilot, break it down. We'll be at the 50% mark here. And if we're not there yet, do we need to change? Or do we really completely want to go through to the end of this pilot? Having those milestone check-ins can really help to say, we realized right away setting up the cadence with texting first was a mistake. Let's rework that. If you see something really not working because you're tracking, then you can adjust. And then you can say, this was so worth it in the end.
I love the idea of milestones. I like that. I think I'm going to steal that and start using that as a phrase too. But that's such a great way to frame it, because something that's also important, going back to the idea of a pilot, not going all in, is that it's not a failure if you get halfway through and you realize that the results you're seeing are not what you expected. It might not be what you expected, and there's pros and cons to that, but that doesn't mean that you did it wrong. It just means that you learned a lesson you weren't expecting to, and now you can use that to be better informed next time. And I think that's really valuable. And I would hope that others, wanting to work on this would. In terms of that flexibility, and also the really important idea that you should be measuring something your software has the ability to measure. You should be thinking about what you're trying to evaluate as you're setting up your pilot, so you don't get to the end and have that horrible realization. But something like using all of the tools in your software is just so important. So thinking about VanillaSoft, not only are reports very customizable, but anybody that's in the audience that's familiar with VanillaSoft, whether you're a customer or not, you should probably be familiar with the idea that VanillaSoft is very customizable, very personalizable. We'll run with it. You can really make your interactions personalized to the constituents that you're working with, and really pay attention to those preferences. And then the other thing that VanillaSoft is great at doing is kind of being as simplistic or as complex as you need it to be. So that's where, because it's so scalable and you can adjust on the fly, you can start with a smaller pilot and a more simplistic pilot. And you find out halfway through that texting was not the right way to start that cadence. Okay, well, make a decision. Are you going to finish the pilot out with that same cadence? Or are you going to now say, okay, well, this is our pilot. And for the first half, these are our results. And now we're going to make this one change. And then we have an A and a B test within our pilot. I really like A/B testing. I'm sure I'm not the only one here that can say that, but A/B testing is just, continual. It's ongoing. So you figure out what it is you're trying to measure. You've got your A and your B group and you find your results. Well, then your B group becomes your A group and then you repeat it again. It's not a one-time thing. And I think that's something important to think about too. But specifically with VanillaSoft, when you're getting something like this set up, one of the best parts about VanillaSoft is that it is so customizable so that you can set it up for what you want. You're not working within the parameters of a different platform or 6 different platforms where you're trying to find X, but your platforms really only allow you to find like Y and a half. And so I think that's where you kind of have the best combination of the two, having your ideas and being able to marry them exactly how you want to, using VanillaSoft to be able to do that. And otherwise, if you are familiar with VanillaSoft, you'll know full well that we talk all the time about how you can report on whatever it is that you want. If you want to build a field in VanillaSoft, we can filter on it. We can use that to be strategic and get deeper into our constituent pools to have those specific personalized conversations. If you've got a field, we can report on that too. So there's just so many different ways and directions you can go to measure. And like you said, it's all about just being deliberate with that and making sure that we're then going to apply those lessons learned. But it's such a crucial part of this pilot. It's something where sometimes it falls off. And that's kind of what could spell disaster for turning the pilot into something bigger or trying another pilot, which is actually a question that just came to mind that we didn't talk about ahead of time. So before we wrap things up, what do you recommend after your pilot? So you do your pilot, you create it, you get everything built out, leadership buy-in, you work with a consultant, you've got some great feedback from you yourself, you take off with VanillaSoft, you do some reporting. What comes next? Do we set up another pilot? Do we set up a longer pilot? Do we go all in?
I think there's a few ways you can do it. So, if you're an annual giving maximizer like me, you might do multiple pilots at the same time. So like that way you can really see, is this going to work for certain sorts of things, but not for others? Or, you might have time sensitive things you want to work on. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions actually about the types of strategies
absolutely
to do with this. So either we can talk about that in the chat, or maybe we'll come back to that really quickly at the end here, but maybe try a couple different things. Like, I'm going to work on a cadence that's all about trying to secure pledges and matches for Day of Giving. So it's going to be everyone who's a leadership donor to Days of Giving in the last couple of years. That's a really straightforward example. Maybe it's going to be, we want to really increase our number of first-time visits for people at the major gift capacity level. We don't have enough staff. It's been hard to do that. Or we've had getting a lot of great planned gifts. What if we knew about this ahead of time? Let's come up with a great persona based on the sorts of planned gifts we're finding out about. And let's make calls and outreach to try and find more people like that before it just shows up. We'd love to connect with those people and thank them now, and also see if they want to do something now. So I would kind of encourage people to maximize, maybe try to do 2, maybe 3, definitely not more than that during the time of your pilot. At the end of the pilot, look at that data and have all those stakeholders who you had to get their buy-in, who had to help on this project, all come together and do that post-mortem. It's really critical that you have an open conversation about this, because it goes to that first thought. We can't predict how this is going to go. We can't think it'll go positive or negative. We have to be pretty neutral, not quite ambivalent, but we just have to be open. So let's get everybody together and find out what was a surprise, what wasn't a surprise. Did we really have what we expected? Were we clever enough or informed enough with our data to kind of knock it out of the park the first time? let's evaluate the results and also let's evaluate the process and think about, is this something our team could do long term? If it is, what does it look like? Who's responsible for it? And then it's up to leadership to do the questions of, do people's JDs need to get updated? Do I need to bring additional resources to the teams? And they fundamentally will need to make a decision with all the key team members about, where does this go from here?
Totally. I want to keep going. We're totally running up on time. But we could keep going. And so that's where we can leave it with our audience, that I hope everyone has been active in the chat up till now. And when we sign off here in a second, we'll make sure we encourage everyone to connect on LinkedIn and further the conversation. But I think this also sets us up for the potential to have a bigger conversation down the road, see what kinds of feedback we get and see where people take these things, and certainly could get back here in a couple of months and talk more in depth on strategy alone or evaluation alone. So I think we have a lot of opportunities ahead of us. So with that, a huge thank you, obviously, for you being here. It's been absolutely wonderful. Time has flown by. And like I said, please feel free to use those QR codes on the screen to connect. Mine will take you to my LinkedIn. We've got Rad Philanthropy linked up there as well. But Perry, anything else you want to add before we hop off for the day?
Well, it was just such a pleasure speaking with you again today, Emily. Thank you so much for your thought leadership around this. And like you, I'm just so excited to see how schools try to take this on. Like the sky is the limit. The gauntlet has been thrown. Let's see what y'all can do. We can't wait to see your success.
Couldn't agree more. So thanks so much, everyone, and join us next time. And that's all for today. Bye-bye.